You know almost nothing about reducers. Well, let me, you know what? I'm going to implement something. Instead of looking for what I'm going to do, I'm going to implement something for you to understand how reducers work, because I think it's very, very interesting, and it is how state works in React. It's how like use state is basically a use reducer shell. Words are escaping me right now. Anyway, so let's just say you want to create a state management solution in a vanilla app. Let's just say we have an array. I should do this where I can use an AI tool, but that's fine. We'll just write everything from scratch. Let's just say you have an array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we're going to have a very simple addition function that my code is over here and I'm pointing at it on here, but I'm also looking at my own screen here. So if I'm looking all over, I'm just looking at the code doing the exact same thing. So if you have an add function for adding X and Y, you can add X and Y and return X plus Y. You could even actually make that shorter and just do this. And very simple functions. Now, what you could do is you can then create a reducer function. Let's call it sum. And sum is array.reduce, add, and then 0, like that. Okay. Are you with me so far? This will do. I'll save this as a gist and put it in the chat later in case y'all want to like follow this. So let me actually call this reducer demo in this GitHub gist. Okay, so what this will do on the first iteration, it'll do 0 plus 1 because it takes 0 as the initial state and then adds it to the first one in that array. So it'll do 0 plus 1. Then when you call sum again, it'll do 1 plus 2. And then after that, it'll do 3 plus 3. I'll stop right there. It's not doing 1 plus 2 because it's 1 and 2 here. It's taking the previous sum of this, which is 1, and then adding it. So this is the initial state, 0, and then it does 0 plus 1. Then this next iteration takes the next value in the array 2, and then adds it to the previous iteration's sum. And so this sum is 3. It takes this 3 here, and then does 3 plus 3. And then after that, it does 6 plus 4. And then after that, it does 10 plus 5. And so it takes the sum from that previous invocation and then adds it with the next element in the array. Does that make sense so far? I see following so far, so I'll take it. That's generally how reduce works for very, very basic state management. And it's a handy mechanism if you think of like this initial value is like the initial state in an app, and then it applies this applies what is changed in the app. And so Redux made the idea of a reducer popular, if you ever used Redux for state management. And so in Redux, they have a reducer, and it looks something like function reducer is state action, and then it does like return state plus action. That's the general vibe of what the reducer is in Redux. But a more detailed example of what this could look like is, let's just say you have a const initial state, and that initial state you could say count is 0. And you could have multiple things. So user is an empty object, making this up. What you could do is you can apply actions to that initial state. And so I could have an actions array. Should I let const? I kind of want to do let because you could add actions to it. It doesn't matter. This is just an example. Okay. Actions will be an array of actions applied to that initial state. And so we could say, we want to say type add, and then that type add, you want to add it by 2. Does that make sense? And then we want to do type minus, and then we're going to subtract by 4. These actions could then be applied. We could add as many as we want to this, but you get the idea. We want to apply these actions to this initial state. And so this reducer, now instead of doing this return state plus action, what I'm going to do in here is I'm going to say if the action type is add, should I do single quotes, double quotes? It doesn't matter, Cassidy. Stop getting caught up on these little things. And if anything is confusing, let me know. If the action.type is add, then you want to say we want to return the existing state, and I'll explain that ... in a second, and then count of the count will be state.count plus action.by. So remember, it was like the state plus action. We're taking like the existing value of the state's count and then increasing it by action.by. And then I could also do else if, and then I'll copy this and change it. 1 second. Copy and paste. We're making this minus. And then we're going to do subtract. Boom. And so that does the subtraction thing. And so if after doing this, if I did like a console.log of the actions.reduce, and then we did reducer, like this reducer function, and then the initial state, the result of this, if we were to put all of this into the big machine, there's my semicolons, the big machine as in your browser console, this would be -2, because it took this count, added 2, subtracted 4, it applied this reducer function to the initial state. Does that make sense? How reducers work? I know I kind of went from adding basic numbers to applying this to JavaScript objects, but it's a funky way of working with JavaScript objects because we don't always know what the actions will be. And so like in Redux and in React, when you use reducer, that's what the dispatch function solves. And I use this ... because then it only applies this action.type add to the count, and then it keeps the rest of the state the same. And so one other thing I could do is I could do some kind of type is log in or something, and then I could make this up. I could do the user has a new username. I could do name is fish. Making this up once again. And so I could add another else if, and then in here I could do the action.type. I'm going to just copy all this again. Action.type, but instead it's going to be login. And then when I add login, instead of count, we're going to be adding the user. And then that user is going to have the name where it's instead of, we don't need to actually care about the initial state because that's just empty. We're just going to have the user, and then the user will have the action, or user's name is action.name. Voila. Makes sense. I sing well, thanks. I sing when I code. I'm gonna make this a public gist so that way y'all can see it. Oh, and then I also have to change that comment, -2. 1 second, let me zoom out. And I'm working. Okay, let me change this to say count. Sorry, that's really tiny. The count is -2. User's name is fish. Because we added that extra one in there. So anyway, I'm going to paste this in the chat. I don't think the chat pasting works on LinkedIn chat, but it works on YouTube and Twitch. But you could also go to gist.github.com/Casadoo, the first part of that URL down there, and you will see this because I just made it public. But anyway, that is generally how reducers work, which it kind of shows you how some JavaScript objects work as well. But this is very, very handy to understand how things work when you are doing more vanilla JavaScripty stuff, or if you just want to understand how a Redux or state management in React works under the hood.